Back in the 90s, Stacey Dash was every man's dream girl. But fast forward to today, and her TikTok videos have people saying she's giving Britney Spears 2.0 vibes. What happened to one of Hollywood's most desired women, and what does her story reveal about the reality so many women face when they hit the wall? Let's get into it. Many people are familiar with the phrase hitting the wall, a term that has often been used, sometimes cruelly, to describe women as they grow older. The phrase suggests a point at which a woman's value in the eyes of society suddenly declines, particularly in relation to beauty, desirability, and opportunities in love or career. At its core, the idea implies that a woman's worth is tightly tied to her youth, physical appearance, and fertility, and once those fade, so too does her relevance. While this notion has been echoed for generations, it has also been increasingly challenged in modern culture, especially as women continue to live longer, healthier, and more productive lives. Traditionally, society reinforced rigid standards for women. In many cultures, youth was not just celebrated but treated as a requirement for desirability. Women were encouraged to marry young, have children quickly, and tie their identity to their ability to be wives and mothers. Career ambitions, personal exploration, and self-expression were often considered secondary, or even distractions, from a woman's real purpose. Within such a framework, the concept of hitting the wall made sense because life was thought to follow a predictable, limited trajectory. You were valuable in your teens and 20s, you settled into domestic life in your 30s, and, by your 40s, you were considered past your prime. But the modern world looks very different. Women today have access to education, professional opportunities, and financial independence on a scale that previous generations could not imagine. They are CEOs, innovators, politicians, artists, and creators shaping the global narrative. This shift alone undermines the outdated belief that a woman's value diminishes as she ages. While appearance and youth may still be emphasized in media and pop culture, there is growing recognition that life does not endure even peak at 30. For many women, it is only the beginning of true self-discovery. What is often overlooked in conversations about aging and women is that confidence, wisdom, and emotional maturity can carry far more weight than youth alone. A woman in her 40s may not look the same as she did at 20, but she may radiate a sense of self-assurance, resilience, and purpose that makes her even more compelling. Consider the actresses, entrepreneurs, and public figures who are celebrated, not only for how they look but for what they contribute. Women like Viola Davis, Oprah Winfrey, Jennifer Lopez, and countless others who command respect and admiration well into midlife and beyond. Their stories challenge the simplistic idea that beauty and opportunity expire with age. The internet and globalization have also transformed the landscape of dating and opportunity. While critics often argue that women lose out with age, digital platforms and social mobility have expanded possibilities far beyond the local neighborhood or workplace. A woman who might once have been considered off the market in her small town now has access to global networks, online communities, and like-minded partners from around the world. Similarly, the growth of movements advocating for body positivity, diversity, and representation has broadened the definition of beauty itself. No longer confined to narrow ideals of youth and thinness, women are celebrated in various shapes, ages, and cultural expressions. Of course, there are still challenges. The double standard of aging where men are often described as distinguished, while women are called old, remains deeply entrenched. A graying man can be labeled wise, powerful, or attractive, while a graying woman is frequently dismissed as invisible. These biases are reflected in industries from Hollywood casting to corporate leadership, where older men often thrive while older women are pushed aside. Yet even here, resistance is growing. More women are speaking out against ageism, demanding equitable treatment, and creating spaces where maturity is embraced rather than hidden. An important factor in this discussion is the question of self-perception. When women internalize the idea of hitting the wall, they may unconsciously limit themselves, assuming that opportunities are gone once they pass a certain age. But when women reject that narrative, they redefine what is possible. They begin new careers in their 40s, travel the world in their 50s, launch businesses in their 60s, and even pursue love, education, and passions well into their 70s and 80s. Stories abound of women who publish their first book after retirement, take up sports later in life, or finally live authentically after decades of societal expectations. This shift in perspective also reshapes how relationships are viewed. In earlier times, marriage was often seen as a woman's ultimate achievement. And once that opportunity passed, she was said to have missed her chance. Today, however, many women view marriage as one option among many, not the sole measure of success. Some choose long-term partnerships without legal ties. Others focus on personal growth, community, or creative work. Even those who marry later in life are rewriting the script, showing that love does not have an expiration date. Moreover, the very concept of prime deserves re-examination. Who decides when someone is in their prime? If prime means physical attractiveness, the definition is narrow and superficial. But if prime means the period when someone is most fully themselves, confident, capable, wise, and independent, then, for many women, the prime comes much later than youth. Life experience brings depth, and that depth can make someone far more appealing than surface beauty ever could. The cultural narrative of hitting the wall also fails to account for men's changing expectations. Increasingly, men value qualities such as emotional intelligence, shared goals, and stability in a partner, qualities that often strengthen with age. While physical attraction plays a role, it is not the only factor driving long-term compatibility. This means women in midlife are not necessarily disadvantaged. In many cases, they are better positioned to form meaningful and lasting connections than their younger counterparts. And yet, despite these realities, the myth persists. Why? Because it benefits certain industries and cultural systems to keep women insecure. Beauty companies, cosmetic surgery clinics, and diet industries profit immensely from convincing women that they must fight aging at all costs. Media outlets gain attention by promoting youth-centered ideals and fueling comparison. But the more women recognize these narratives as manufactured, the more power they reclaim. Aging becomes not a decline but a transition into a new season of life. Ultimately, the idea of hitting the wall is a reflection of outdated, patriarchal thinking rather than an objective truth. It reduces a woman's worth to external markers and ignores the richness of her inner life, her contributions, and her ongoing potential. Women across the world are proving that fulfillment, love, and opportunity are not limited to their 20s but evolve and expand over time. The wall, in reality, exists only in the imagination of those who cling to narrow standards. The more women reject it, the more it crumbles. In the end, the challenge is not about denying that aging changes people, it changes everyone, men and women alike, but about redefining what those changes mean. Instead of loss, aging can mean freedom from unrealistic expectations. Instead of decline, it can mean growth into authenticity. And instead of hitting the wall, it can mean breaking down barriers, not just for oneself but for future generations. Women are not defined by the years behind them but by the choices they make moving forward. And that truth is far more powerful than any outdated phrase could ever capture.
I want to say, like, whenever people try to scare women, like, oh, you're gonna end up alone, or no one's gonna find you attractive, that is not scary. I just want to first and foremost say, women have a life outside of men thinking they're.
It's worth pointing out that age doesn't erase beauty. Many women in their 40s and 50s remain striking. Think of Lisa Ray or Amber Rose, who continue to carry elegance and presence well beyond the years people often label as a prime. So, the concept of hitting the wall isn't really about turning older. It's about no longer having the same access to opportunities, attention, or advantages one once had. In sports, they call it father time, a reminder that every peak eventually fades, though the timeline is different for everyone. Just as LeBron James has stretched his athletic prime longer than most, some women extend their personal prime well beyond expectations. But the reality remains, at some point, what once came easily no longer does. Take the story of Stacey Dash. Back in the 1990s, especially after her breakout role in Clueless, she was admired almost universally. Her beauty and femininity made her a cultural favorite. But over the years, personal struggles and controversial choices reshaped her public image. Multiple marriages ended, challenges with substance use became public, and now, much of her presence lives on TikTok. While she shares lighthearted videos, many viewers interpret them less as playful fun and more as quiet signals of distress, drawing comparisons to Britney Spears. Online behavior. The reactions she receives are mixed. Some fans continue to cheer her on, offering kind words. Others see contradiction, pointing out how she once distanced herself from Black culture yet now re-engages through the very same community she once criticized. This pattern isn't unique to Stacey. We've seen similar stories unfold with celebrities like Halle Berry, whose personal choices and public stances led to questions about identity and belonging before reconnecting with Black partners later in life. The larger truth is, sobering, chasing approval outside your own community rarely guarantees lasting acceptance. Time and again, those who put down their roots in criticism of Black culture find themselves without the respect or stability they sought. And when age or circumstance changes the level of attention they receive, many are left wondering why the support they expected never fully materialized. In today's world, men are also far less tolerant of difficult attitudes, regardless of a woman's beauty or age. That's why even younger stars, such as Kishia Cole, Tia Mowry, or Kik Palmer sometimes face criticism, despite being in what should be considered their prime. The lesson becomes clear: it's not just about looks or age. Relationships, admiration, and long-term respect hinge on how people carry themselves. And no amount of charm or beauty can permanently shield someone from that truth. The internet changed the game entirely. In the past, dating options were limited by geography or neighborhood, your city, maybe the places you frequented. If you were in Sacramento, for example, chances were high you only met people within your own community. Someone who looked like Stacey Dash would have stood out simply because there weren't many women like her in a small, localized dating pool. Losing someone like that back then felt like a big deal because there weren't obvious alternatives. But today, borders don't exist the same way. Flights are cheaper, international dating has become mainstream, and social media connects people across continents. Men realize they don't have to stay in situations they find draining or unfulfilling. They can move on, explore elsewhere, and meet women from around the world. That shift has eliminated the scarcity mindset. What once felt irreplaceable is now easily replaced. With that freedom, men are thinking more logically about relationships. Instead of ignoring red flags or excusing repeated problems, they weigh the cost of staying versus leaving. And more often, they're choosing to leave. Where men of the past might have tried to play safe or believing a woman's story of being wronged and promising to never hurt her, men today are quicker to recognize patterns of dysfunction and avoid them altogether. This brings us back to Stacey Dash, for marriages, for divorces, all, with Whiteman and now dancing alone on TikTok. The question isn't just about her age or beauty. It's about why the men she preferred no longer want to commit to her. If those were the partners she prioritized, why aren't they still around? That's not merely a question about her personal choices. It's a reflection of a broader dynamic many women face when what they once relied on, youth, beauty, or novelty, no longer has the same leverage it once did. When that reality sets in, it can be deeply unsettling. And often, instead of confronting hard truths, the narrative shifts. Suddenly, it becomes about self-love, healing, or working on oneself. While there is nothing wrong with self-reflection and growth, these phrases are sometimes used as shields, ways to avoid accountability for patterns that keep repeating. The Stacey Dash story resonates because it is not unique. We've seen similar arcs play out with other public figures. Take Jeannie Mai, for example. After her high-profile divorce and subsequent struggles, she faced the same scrutiny. Instead of digging into her own choices or the red flags that may have been ignored, the conversation often turned outward, placing blame on men, circumstances, or cultural dynamics. In the public eye, this becomes a familiar script. The woman presents herself as the victim of misfortune, and the audience is invited to sympathize. But beneath the surface lies a tougher reality. Patterns rarely form in isolation. If the same outcome happens multiple times, at some point the common denominator has to be acknowledged. This isn't about singling out specific women, but about highlighting a cultural tendency to avoid uncomfortable self-examination. For decades, women were told that if they simply looked good enough, stayed fit, or projected femininity, everything else would fall into place. But beauty, while powerful, is not infinite. Over time, personality, choices, and mindset begin to matter far more. When those things are overlooked, even the most glamorous life can unravel. This is why accountability matters. Without it, the same mistakes repeat, and the outcomes remain unchanged. Meanwhile, the men these women often desire, resourceful, high-value men, have no shortage of options. Just as women have preferences, men also set standards. And increasingly, those standards go beyond looks. A man who has built wealth, stability, and influence is not just evaluating beauty. He is evaluating character, peace of mind, and long-term compatibility. He is asking, Does this person add value to my life? Or will she bring chaos and drama? If a woman's history includes repeated divorces, substance issues, or public scandals, many men, particularly those with options, see it as a liability. They don't need to fix anyone. They can simply choose someone else. This shift is a stark departure from the past. A few decades ago, a beautiful woman could rely almost solely on her looks to secure and maintain relationships with high-value men. Even if her personality or behavior was difficult, men had fewer options, less access, and social expectations that pressured them to stay. But with globalization, digital networks, and social media, men now see possibilities everywhere. They know they can walk away and find someone new without being confined by geography or limited by scarcity. As a result, tolerance for dysfunction has plummeted. That's why you sometimes see women who once had access to everything, fame, admiration, money, attention, and up alone, performing for validation online. TikTok dances, Instagram reels, and attention-grabbing posts often mask a deeper truth. They're searching for the approval and affection they once received effortlessly but no longer command. And when those responses don't come in the same volume or from the same caliber of men, the cycle of frustration and blame intensifies. But the lesson here goes beyond individual celebrities. It reflects a cultural shift. Beauty and opportunity may open doors, but character and accountability are what keep them open. Without humility, growth, and self-awareness, those doors close no matter how attractive someone might be. In fact, the higher someone rises on looks alone, the harder the fall can feel when beauty fades and character flaws remain unaddressed. Consider how different the narrative could be if more women publicly embraced accountability. Imagine a figure like Stacey Dash saying, "Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I chose poorly. Here's what I've learned." Such vulnerability could be transformative, both for her own healing and for the countless women watching who might recognize themselves in her story. Instead of projecting blame outward or clinging to the illusion of eternal desirability, taking ownership could inspire a healthier, more grounded conversation about relationships and aging. Of course, accountability is not easy. It forces people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, their choices, and their impact on others. It requires humility in a culture that rewards pride and self-promotion. But it is also the path to growth. Without it, people stay trapped in cycles of denial, repeating the same actions while expecting different results. That's why you see women in their 50s or 60s, still attractive by any measure, wondering why commitment eludes them because the deeper issues were never addressed. True self-love requires accountability, owning flaws, learning from mistakes, and growing beyond appearances. Beauty may attract attention, but only character, loyalty, and peace sustain lasting relationships. Without accountability, even fame fades, leaving isolation behind. Respect is earned through growth, not looks, and without it, opportunities inevitably disappear.